innocent, I tell you! Innocent!
While in the Helluva Boss World, we've seen Blitzo in prison or on trial for some of his various crimes or actions. If he was truly charged for all of the crimes he committed throughout the series so far, what would his prison sentence be? Let's find out, shall we? Firstly, before we start this count, I'm going to establish a couple simple rules here. First, given that this is an American show that mostly targets American audiences, I'm going to mostly assume that by default, most of these crimes will take place under US jurisdiction and criminal law, unless the crime is explicitly stated to take place in a foreign country where he, for instance, portaled to. Secondly, depending on the age will of course matter too, as for instance, for the crimes committed during minors, we will of course acknowledge how old he was till 18 and then basically depict it to there, because a minor in juvenile prison will of course be freed when they become 18 to get a second chance. So for instance, if he was charged of a crime when he was 16, we'll make the prison sentence at most max 2 years because he would be freed when he was 18 to get a second chance. Alright, now that we've got our simple rules established, let's start the sentencing. Starting with the adolescent crimes, we of course have the first crime being when he was a preteen, that of course when he enters the Royal Stolas' mansion and steals a buttload of stuff from it, per his dad's own request. Now, given that the stuff being stolen was of course things like golden crowns and expensive jewelry, this of course immediately exceeds the grand theft amount required for that charge. And this of course basically gives it the probably most max penalty possible, that being 20 years. So we're going to immediately, while that would be the sentence, given that Blitzo was about 10 to 12 years, we're gonna assume kind of he's like 11 as a kind of in the middle guess. So this would be about 7 years since he would be released from juvie and given a second chance as an 18-year-old adult, even if he received the harshest punishment possible, plus a presumed $100K fine that his parents would have to pay for. The second prison sentence or crime that Blitzo partakes in is within Helluva Boss's Spring Broken. It's mentioned when Barasika states this about Blitzo maxing out her credit cards.
You gonna run off, leaving someone else to pay for the hotel room, steal their car and run 3 rings to wrap and max my credit cards on shitty horse riding lessons?
Now, while it's skeptical to believe what she's saying, since if it were true, I would assume it would be pretty easy to report Blitzo for illegally using the credit card, but assuming the truth is being told here, given that Blitzo partook in basically grandiose credit card fraud. However, being that this was taken during his teenage years or when he was a relative, not fully grown adult, he would of course receive a prison sentence of about 5 years rather than the max 10 years that maxing out someone's credit card would carry. Now, the second and earliest adult crime that partakes during his adult years is during Viscerali's flashback, where Blitzo, as a 20-year-old, unintentionally causes a fire within the circus that he's working for, of course causing harm and arson-related destruction towards circus goers and Viscerali. Now, despite this fire being caused by Blitzo being accidental, US crime law still states that even if you accidentally cause arson, you still can be charged and held accountable criminally if there's clear irresponsibleness causing the fire, as shown within the instance where Blitzo carelessly pushing the candles of the cake away is what caused the fire, and a clear example of negligent arson that could have easily been avoided. This would of course give him about 6 years in jail due to causing bodily harm to Viscerali, and 4-year prison sentence for causing massive property damage, that being the entire circus, therefore making it a whopping 10 years whether accident or not, due to the fact that despite being an accident, he still chose to partake in willfully negligent behavior that could have easily been avoided had he been a responsible person. Starting with our attempted assassination charges, we have the moment where Blitzo was almost convinced by Stryker to shoot Stolas, as well as shot a sniper at Martha. Now, given the stolen shooting wasn't premeditated and Blitzo of course chose not to fire a single shot, he would be charged with the lowest possible sentence, that being 5 years. The Martha sentence, however, differs, given that while this crime of attempted murder was clearly premeditated, he chose to break into Martha's home, trespassing beyond the fence and shooting her from the window, innuendo. Therefore, generally, while it would carry the max possible sentencing of 20 years, Blitzo of course manages to get lucky, as given that at the near end of the episode, police and law enforcement do blow up the entire house with the intent of exterminating the whole family due to believing they are terrorist mass murders. So luckily for Blitzo, Moxie kind of saved his ass, so law enforcement won't go after him due to the notion that they collectively exterminated all of them, and to avoid possible narratives being spun against them in a realistic scenario. So we'll just call it even and only add the Stolas situation to this count. Stalking is something we've seen Blitzo commonly partake in multiple times. For example, in X and O's, Aussies, and Harvest Moon Festival, we see clear examples of Blitzo stalking and taking pictures of people doing embarrassing acts without their permission, which of course, given that he's repeatedly done it multiple times to Millie and Moxie, this would of course incur the most extreme punishment, that being a 1-year jail sentence plus an additional $1,000 fine for stalking another couple and taking embarrassing pictures of them without their permission. Breaking and entering is something Blitzo's done consistently throughout this show, such as for instance, him trespassing on Stolas' property as an adult to steal items from him again, trespassing on Stolas' property in Apology Tour to talk to him when he didn't want to be talked to, trespassing on Martha's property to try and kill her, and trespassing on Millie and Moxie's property to creepily spy on them. Now, given that this is a repeated habit of Blitzo doing this, as well as a repeated intent to disturb or harm the people involved he's breaking into, he will be charged with generally the max prison sentence possible, that being 20 years in jail. Continuing on with our most evident crime, this is of course the many murders that Blitzo and the Imp Gang partook in. First, we'll start off with the sentences that Blitzo didn't explicitly kill or cause himself, but was still an accomplice and partition, therefore making him be charged as an accomplice to murder. Starting off with of course the old man, while Blitzo and the gang weren't responsible for causing his death, as the cherubs were the one that cut the rope that caused the piano to fall on him, given that he still partook in trespassing on his property and trying to drive him to game ending. This would generally be reduced to about 3 years for his game ending crime, since they weren't successful, and for the crime of trespassing on private property, given this man's wealth, he would probably get an attorney to try and get them the most extreme crime possible, that being 1 year. The next charge is him being an accomplice to X's and O's, and while Millie did all of the killing in this exact scene, Blitzo of course being the one driving the car that crashes into the wall, still allowed her to of course partake in it. This of course makes him an accomplice. Now, given that the people being murdered are mafia boss members, aka people that are gang members that terrorize the general public, factors such as this will basically reduce Blitzo's sentence, as well as him being willing to comply, therefore lowering the extreme sentence possible to about a mini 2 years possible, due to his cooperation and the people targeted. Another example of Blitzo being an accomplice to murder would be an instance where Mafia House basically collapses in the episode where him and Viscerali are kidnapped. Again, being the people in question are mafia members, aka people that terrorize law-abiding citizens of the town. It's very unlikely that his sentence will be anything more than 5 years. Another example of Blitzo being an accomplice to murder would be Unhappy Campers, where while he doesn't kill the target, a firework by accident does the job. However, being that he wasn't the main person stalking the victim, as well as came in during the last minute, his sentence would be about 5 years only. Another example of being an accomplice to murder would be the latest Bad Dravezzo short, where Blitzo, essentially as a result of his reckless driving, basically killed a man almost in a supercar. Now, while Blitzo was not the one to make the final killing blow, his attempts at reckless driving are a clear, deliberate attempt to make this person die via car wreckage. This is a more serious accomplice to murder charge, which would likely possibly grant a 25-year sentence. However, given the man's comment at the end before Moxie makes the killing,
I need to be the first one there to blow him!
This comment could theoretically potentially lower the sentence by a probability of about 5 years, due to the fact that the person in question targeted was an incest predator, therefore making the possibility of his sentence about 20 years instead, due to it being argued by a good lawyer, for instance, of it being a manslaughter charge, where for instance, Blitzo lost his cool and wanted to kill this guy because he wanted to be an incest predator towards his own child. The next example of Blitzo being an accomplice to an attempted murder would of course be Helluva Boss World. While Blitzo didn't directly lead to Andreofus almost dying, him partaking the fight against him would kind of make him somewhat of an accomplice by default. However, given he was nowhere near Luna's attempted murder, his sentence would be possibly like 2 years. Now obviously the biggest act of course would be Spring Break, where while for example the murders that Blitzo didn't partake in, he didn't do it himself, he still orchestrated the clear plan to order his other clients and various individuals, including his own daughter, to do it as well. This would of course basically give him default life in prison regardless, due to the amount of people that were killed as a by proxy of his plan and his orders, but also just by proxy of the people killed to begin with. Before we move on to the other extreme of all the crimes, that being Blitzo partaking in murder, we will of course cover some of the various other crimes we haven't discussed yet. That being of course Helluva Boss's Ghost Fuckers, where Blitzo throughout his adventure basically harasses almost every single guest within the hotel, which then leads to the chase scene. Now, while generally harassment rarely ever involves criminal charges, given the amount of surplus people Blitzo harassed at the hotel, alongside his clear intent to do so, he would receive about 6 months in jail and a $1,000 fine. Another grandiose crime that takes place would be the massive destruction of property featured at the end of Lululand, where Blitzo and the gang basically destroy the entire amusement park. Now this would of course be classified as destruction of property, and given the severity of the property in question, this would carry about 10 years, the max in regards to the prison sentence. Another crime that we see within Miscellaneous is where Blitzo assaults a diner in a restaurant. Now given this wasn't premeditated and was more of a scuffle, this would of course generally give about the minimum 1-year prison sentence. And now we of course move on to the most heinous and extreme crime Blitzo commits throughout the show, being murder. Now first of all, we won't count any of the murders conducted in Lululand, as Blitzo of course utilized the right to stand your ground. This is due to the fact being that many of the imps were trying to kill Stolas, and being Stolas' bodyguard, he of course utilized the right to stand your ground against a dangerous or threatening individual, therefore not making any crimes there. However, in regards to the other murders, Blitzo collectively murdered 28 people in Helluva Boss Spring Broken, killed 1 person in Helluva Boss Cherubs, collectively murdered 28 agents and truth seekers, and brutally gunned down 5 people in Helluva Boss Seeing Stars, partook in 33 killings in Helluva Boss Oops, killed 2 people in Mammon's Magnificent Musical, and of course killed Emberlyn in Helluva Boss Weeaboo. Additionally, in the new Helluva Boss pilot, which is of course the officially canon pilot, we see him basically kill about 7 people on his own volition. Calculating all of these kills, we have a collective 105, which again, basically counting it to the multiplication of generally the typical range of sentencing for a murder, which generally ranges within 25 years or so. So we'll go with that. 25 times 105 gives you a total of 2,625 sentenced years, or 1 life sentence. And given that throughout Helluva Boss's world, we've seen the death penalty partake, as for instance within the Mastermind episode, it's very likely the death penalty would commence for all these crimes if Blitzo was theoretically charged, so we'll just go with that and add the life sentences as a possible alternative. So counting all of the crimes together and the sentencing in this case, we have about 1 death sentence, 2 life sentences, 2,722.5 years in prison, and a $102,000 fine. Ultimately, this video was a pretty interesting concept to make. I saw this like how long would XX sentence be sort of popping up on YouTube, so I decided, you know what, why don't I do that for this show? And you know what, we'll see how this video does, but if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share this video around, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.